Hello and welcome to yet another review of an anime game which is surprisingly not crap. This time I'm looking at the first Bleach game to grace the DS, The Blade of Fate. Taking its cue from the Soul Society story arc of the series, the game is a tournament-style fighter which sees our orange-haired hero Ichigo embark on a quest to save his friend Rukia from her impending execution. To explain how the story got to this point would take quite a while, and I can't honestly be bothered going into it right now. Arguably, neither could the game, but more on that later. Now, if you had a SNES back in the day, you might remember that there were quite a few anime-based fighters available for the system. The likes of Ranma, Dragon Ball, and Fist of the North Star all had their fair share of beat-em-ups, most of which were quite pretty for the time. But generally they were average at best, with mismatched characters, poor collision detection and ungainly controls. Basically that was what I'd expected from Bleach. Thus it comes as a pleasant surprise to see how well the game actually plays. Coming from the much loved developer's Treasure, The Blade of Fate feels like a very serious beat 'em up straight from the off. The controls are nice and sharp, with 3-button input for normal attacks and a full range of Street Fighter style specials. The 2 additional power bars sit alongside your usual health bar and can be spent on stronger attacks, dodge moves or super attacks. Bouts can feature up to 4 characters simultaneously, which is very impressive for a handheld game, and this also allows for a 4-person multiplayer mode. For larger fights, you can also jump Fatal Fury style between the background and the foreground, which helps keep the playing area manageable. It's also worth mentioning the game's main addition to the usual fighting setup, the card deck. Comprising a fairly wide variety of status-altering powers that can be activated from the bottom screen of the DS, the cards attempt to add an extra layer of tactical depth to Bleach in a way that's not too dissimilar to the deck system seen in the two Jump Stars games. These can certainly help give you an edge while you're fighting, but in the one-player mode at least, I find myself often forgetting to use the cards in the heat of the moment, and as a relatively casual player of beat-em-ups, I didn't think that they added an awful lot to the overall experience. I mean, it's nice that they're there, but I don't think the game would have been any the worse without them. The bottom screen can also function as a quick means of activating your special attacks. Whilst most of the combinations aren't too hard to pull off, this is quite a handy feature when you're new to the game and you might be finding you can't get the moves out when you need them. Graphically, the game is very impressive for the hardware, with big, well-drawn sprites and some nice detail in the backgrounds. The look of the game actually reminds me a lot of the SNK beat-em-ups, particularly as it features the same kind of zooming effect that pans the camera in and out of the fight depending on the player's location. If I was being really picky about it, a little more animation in the cutscenes would have been nice, but when the in-game graphics look this good, it's a very minor complaint. Certainly there isn't quite as much to do in the one-player mode as there is in the likes of Jump Ultimate Stars, but there's a good selection of artwork, music files and new game cards for the Achievement Hunters term, and the range of characters available in the game is also excellent, with 28 to choose from once they've all been made available. Unfortunately, however, some of the characters do feel a bit overpowered in terms of the special moves they have available to them. I would say all the characters are usable, but as the game sticks so closely to the plot of the series, only a handful are capable of the top level Bankai power attacks, which arguably gives them an unfair advantage. At the other end of the spectrum, a few of the characters feel so relatively underpowered that they really seem like little more than filler to provide extra unlockables and boost the game's character count. Although this won't stop you enjoying the game with these other characters, it does feel a little like laziness on the part of the coders, and if you have a particular favourite amongst these more minor characters, you could end up frustrated by their lack of abilities. In a way though, I suppose this is the sort of dilemma that you're always going to get when you're making a licensed game. The most powerful in-game characters are the major players in the story. If all the characters were equally balanced, you could argue that it wouldn't be faithful to the source material. Speaking of the source material, much of the one-player game is taken up with story mode, which is organised into episodes based around each character and their role in the overall plot, which is a nice touch if you're a fan of the series, but given that the game does remarkably little to summarise the events leading up to the Soul Society arc, anyone not familiar with the storyline of Bleach may be pretty baffled by it. Not surprisingly, this main episode is built around playing as Ichigo, and is substantially longer than the others, complete with branching story paths dependent on your performance in some of the bouts. By comparison, the other characters' episodes are mostly quite brief, and taking only 4 or 5 fights before completion, filling in a little bit of the side story along the way. This seems like an odd way to organise what is ostensibly the main part of the one-player game, and it does feel a little disjointed as you become acquainted with one character's fighting style just in time to move on to the next one. Nevertheless, it does sort of force you into giving all the characters a go rather than just sticking with one for the duration, and some of the little bits of story are quite amusing too. Obviously the game is going to have massive appeal to fans of the Bleach series, but non-fans may still want to give this one a look all the same. Whilst the story mode may seem like a bit of a slog if you're not into the series, the fact is that if you want a decent fighting game for the DS, there's not an awful lot to choose from. There's this and its sequel, there's the 2 Smash Brothers style jump games, and there's the divisive Guilty Gear Dust Strikers, but that's about it really. It seems strange that the DS hasn't hosted an actual Capcom or SNK fighter port, considering that the GBA had very nice conversions of both Street Fighter and KOF, but until such a time as this situation is remedied, Bleach is about your best option for a serious fighting game on the machine, especially if the Jumpstars games don't appeal to you. So, while it's tempting to suggest that Treasure's determination to adhere to the license may have held him back on this occasion, The Blade of Fate is both a first-rate fighting game and an excellent example of what can be achieved on the DS hardware. The final score is 8 out of 10.